Coming in at number 15 on our 2023 Locked On Senators NHL Draft rankings, he's a man who took the captaincy from Ridley Gregg after he graduated in Brandon. It's Nate Danielson.
Yes, Nate Danielson, the new captain of the Brandon Wheat Kings. He's a centerman from Red Deer, Alberta. In 68 games, he had 33 goals and 45 assists. And tough time to take over a team as captain, Ross, when they missed the playoffs. Unfortunately, not a whole lot of support for Nate Danielson on that team, but that didn't stop him from having a pretty good season.
Oh, didn't stop him at all. And when you look at that, it's like, how are you going to put your team on the back as a captain, as a guy who had over a point per game last year, and now he doesn't have the ability. And I know Ridley missed a lot of time last year, whether it was World Juniors or he dealt with an injury at some point. So there weren't times where he was stuck behind him, but he was playing center as a first-line role this year and just a great skater. First thing you notice about him when you put on his highlight tape is he's a big body, but can skate so well. He led the team in scoring by 8 points, Pillsy. And after the guy who went second, if you take out the guy who went second, which I didn't, I said 8 points, so I'm not cherry-picking completely, but above the second guy, 28 more points. So you can tell that he led this team in the box score, but also in terms of the emotional leader of this team as well. When you look at the stats he pulled up, 33 goals, 45 assists, and the rankings, a little bit all over the place, Bills. If you go Olympic style, where you take out the lowest and highest score, it really crunches the numbers here. But Corey Pronman has him at 7, while Elite Prospects is all the way down at 16.
Yeah, so again, Corey Pronman, his rankings are very interesting because, well, we'll get to this, but there's been players that we've scoffed at how low he has, and unfortunately, and we'll dive deeper into the details, I would say he is very high on Nate Danielson here, as he has him at 7, whereas Craig Button at 17, Scott Wheeler at 20, Rachel Dory did not rank him, but she only did a top 10 so far, Chris Peters at 13, and then Elite Prospects all the way down at 26. So you have a range of 7 from Pronman and Elite Prospects 26. That gives him an average rank of 16.6.
What really stood out to me was Elite Prospects in their write-up in their draft guide. I really appreciated how they acknowledge, like, look, the industry is really high on this guy because he's a safe pick. He's a guy who you can easily see the tools to be an NHL forward. And it's just, is he going to peak as a bottom 6 who can do a bit of everything? Or is he going to really accelerate once he's given a specified role in the organization that he's going into? There's no doubt he's going to be back in Brandon, hopefully leading a Wheat Kings resurgence a little bit, getting them back into the picture of being a competitive team like they historically have. But I just think the tools are going to attract the team to probably take him in a range where I think the initial reaction on Twitter is going to be kind of like, oh, I can't believe this guy was passed over. I can't believe that guy. And a lot of that has to do with the strength of this class versus an indictment on Nate Danielson. I think he'd be a 10 to 15 pick last year in the draft with no questions asked. Whereas this year, it's like, oh man, there's some really intriguing prospects. So I understand why the industry's higher on him though, right, Pillsy? Like, you watch him play, you can see how it would translate to the next level.
Yeah, it can. The thing I noticed, Ross, is he more often than not chooses to go right at defenders with the puck, but then he can calmly deke through them. Like, you rarely see him try to have space and keep the defender away from him. Like, if a defender has his gap set up, Danielson is like, okay, now I know where you're set up. I can either weave right through you, or like you mentioned, he's a very good skater. I'll just simply go right around you. But whereas that looks great and is effective in junior, Ross, I'm worried he's going to get too comfortable doing that, and he's going to rely on that. And then when you get to the NHL and you got guys that have better gap control, longer reach, faster skaters, his go-to move isn't going to work every time. And then he's going to just continually get shut down over and over again. Now, I'm not saying that will happen. I'm just saying that's a concern, because maybe as he gets older and more experienced, he's going to be able to do that with more ease and be able to get around those better defenders. But that was one thing I noticed. Almost every highlight he was doing that, and it looks great in junior, but can it translate to the pros?
It's worth noting that this right shot centerman, who I could kind of see being a winger at the next level, is one of the oldest players in the draft. The draft starts at September 15th every year. and he's born on September 27th. So he's just 2 weeks from being eligible for last year's draft. And I think that could put him down a few teams' lists because you see it and you're like, oh, is there as much development as a guy who's maybe born in June or July, that sort of thing. So I do understand that. I do see him as a guy where a team who has a culture and maybe even has a young and up and coming team and is looking to more fill roles than try to hit a home run on talent and a guy who could score 40. They're going to jump up and take this guy. And the elite prospect shades of Philip Hedl, maybe at the same age. I can't really speak too much about how Philip Hedl was as a junior level player, but when I see Philip Hedl play now, I think there's a little bit more playmaking ability than there is in Nate Danielson's game. But maybe that's something he can add. So, Pilsy, why don't you give your piece and say what the scouts are saying about Nate Danielson?
Yep. So Corey Pronman, who was, if you remember, the highest on him at 7, says Danielson is a well-rounded center who has a lot of NHL traits. He's a big body who skates and competes well, which, when combined with his offensive touch, allows him to be effective in a lot of situations.
And elite prospects, who we said is a lot lower at 26. Perhaps no player in this year's draft exemplifies the divergence of opinions between the team side and the public sphere than Danielson. So most of their group rates him as a late 5th round, but many on the team side see him as a lock for the top 15. So that's where the intrigue just becomes even bigger with Nate Danielson. Pilsy, is he an X factor in this draft of how the rest of it will fall?
Yeah, possibly. I think there's going to be a couple teams, like you mentioned, that latch onto him, and then a couple teams that just aren't really interested. They're going for a different type prospect. I think he gets drafted closer to 20th here. I think he projects to be a good third line center that can play up and down the lineup because in Brandon, he's the top guy, as mentioned, the captain. He was not only on the power play, he was also killing penalties. So he's getting good experience. Like, that's the one thing. If you're going to be on I don't want to say bad team, because when I looked at the WHL standings, Kelowna made the playoffs and they had less points than Brandon. They were just in the other conference, right? So it's one of those things. But when you're not on an amazing team, at least be trying things and work on your development and use that to a strength, which I think Danielson did. So I got Danielson at 3.5 stars for me. I don't know. I think he's going to be a good player, but I don't see a lot of upside here compared to guys in this area.
Right. And those teams drafting in that area, a lot of them just had changes at the top. So I don't even know where they're thinking in terms of Pittsburgh 14 with Kyle Dubas coming in. Nashville has Barry Trotz coming in. Calgary has Craig Conroy coming in.
Yeah, wow.
And that would be the kind of that area, that 14 to 16 range where anything can happen, where like, I think 13 at Buffalo, you'd be reaching to get him at that point, but anywhere from Detroit on at 17, I don't know if Winnipeg has kind of they always do have an affinity. It feels like the guys who play close to here, whether it's Minnesota, they have a ton of Minnesotans on the team. They've got some Winnipeggers and Manitoba natives as well. Like, could that be a landing spot for him? Who knows? But we'll find out soon. For more draft coverage, head over to Locked On Senators YouTube page. There, you will find all of our draft profiles living and all episodes of the Locked On Senators podcast.